Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we're continuing on the 62 GMC by working on getting the cab mounted to our 74 Chevy frame. So we've got some measuring and cutting, a whole lot of test fitting that's going to be happening, and a little bit later, once I get the cab figured out, I'm going to hang the core support and work on putting some of the body together to make sure everything's going to line up as it should. If you missed the initial teardown and test fit video, I've got a link to it down in the description box below, as well as a link to the build playlist. So if there's any content that you missed, you can check out that playlist and catch up. Also, in my opinion, I think this is going to be one of the most fun and creative portions of this build, and figuring out how to get this cab mated, because the cab is going to be the foundation for the rest of the truck and how everything else is going to bolt up and line up and stuff. So this really needs to be dialed in just right. But we're also going to see a lot of big visual change with the body basically coming back together before it gets blown apart again, for like super stripping the frame and rebuilding the truck from there. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this build. In short, we're taking the best of two old parts trucks that were destined for the scrapyard and elevating our 62 GMC C1000 to a proper Restomod status. If you haven't subscribed already, definitely consider doing so, and make sure that little notification bell is selected, because you don't want to miss any updates on this thing. In the last video, I talked some about how there's two basic ways to go about building this truck. There's a few significant differences between the frame on the 74 versus the 62's original frame. Where the cab mounted on the 62's frame, it was pretty much flat, but the 74's frame kicks up a whole lot sooner. So with how I have the cab right now, it's actually lifted up a little bit higher relative to where it would have been on the 62's frame. Now, again, there's a couple ways to go about doing this. Cutting reliefs in the back of the cab floor to where the cab sits over the frame rails right here to account for the hiked up difference, or using this back as the the starting point, so to speak, and then adjusting the front body mounts accordingly. That's the route that I'm going to end up taking to try to limit the heavy fabrication and hopefully give me a good reference point that I can go off of for the rest of the truck. A good air hammer definitely makes that pretty easy, but once the body mount is out, the rest of the rivets just hammer out, so pretty straightforward. Now I'm gonna go find some bolts so we can bolt this cab mount to the outside of the frame rail, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that everything lines up good. So far, so good. The body mount area lines up really good over there. It still needs a little bit more adjustment, but the cab itself needs to be pushed that way, maybe like half an inch or an inch or so, and I think that will make it line up as perfect or as close as it's gonna get. So before I mess with it even further, I'm gonna go ahead and reposition this other frame mount, and then we can dial it in just right. And again, fingers crossed, I think this is gonna work. While the body mounting locations were close, I did have to oval the 74's frame mounts a little bit because the holes for the body were a little bit more inset. So I think I've got it just about right. Let's lower the body back down and see how it lines up. After removing the front cab mounts off of the 62's frame, I looked at this a bit more and something just didn't look quite right. So I went ahead and threw on one of the fenders, and lo and behold, the cab is actually sitting too far back. So there are enough differences in the mounting locations between the 74 cab and the 62 cab to where they don't sit exactly in the same spot. Not all is lost though, because a lot of the work that I've already done back there I had to do anyway. Now it's just a matter of repositioning things to where the wheel gap lines up. So I'm going to undo the bolts that I have back there. I'm probably going to lower the cab down a little bit, shuffle the frame around, and just do some test fitting. With the 62, the front suspension was pretty antiquated. It's a torsion bar setup without coil springs, along with four-wheel manual drum brakes and even manual steering. This truck was pretty bare bones overall. However, these old GMC trucks were built for serious work. The 62's frame was originally set up for a 305 cubic inch GMC V6 and a 4-speed Muncie transmission. It was a stout setup to say the least. Unfortunately, the 62's suspension design is just not as easy to live with nowadays when it comes to serviceable components. It would take a whole lot of work, fabrication, and parts changing to get the 62's frame up to where the 74 already is. Like I said, the main reason I'm building the truck this way is to have something that's very easy to live with, which is not something that you can say too often about a classic vehicle. Even one that's been restored, and especially so if it's been restored to original spec. I'll be able to pretty much get anything and everything I need, regardless if it's brakes, steering, suspension components, or even something relating to the engine or transmission that I'll be swapping into this truck, either through acdelco.com, a local GM dealer, or a GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco distributor. Throughout the series, I'll have links down in the description box below to list the specific parts that I'm using, so you can go to acdelco.com and check all of that out, or put your vehicle in there to see what parts they offer for it. This is going to be awesome for the long term because I'm incorporating parts that are backed by General Motors, and because of that, I can be sure that I'll be setting up this project for success. I'll be able to daily drive this or take it on a long trip and not worry about it. The 74 chassis is already set up pretty good. It's got power steering and power brakes with a coil-sprung front suspension. The brakes are discs in front and drums in the rear, and this particular truck was actually equipped with the optional heavy-duty brake package, which had larger brakes in the front and the rear. It's also already set up for a small block Chevy, which makes it easily adaptable over to an LS, so this is going to be sweet. Now that the rear cab mounts have been tacked on, I'm going to finish up the front now. I basically have to make sure the cab and the frame are even relative to one another. We don't want the frame tweaked to one side or the cab, pitched too forward or backward. you know, so on and so forth. So I've got an array of jack stands all around the truck and different orientations to, you know, make little adjustments here and there. Now let's do all of the final, you know, leveling and stuff to make sure we're all good, and then we can get the front tacked in place. The perches are now fully welded to the frame. Now I'm at the point where I can put the full weight of the cab on the frame and see how it sits. I ended up doing something a little bit different with the front perches. Compared to how they were on the 62's frame, I flipped them over, which allowed me to get a little extra height out of them, and I didn't actually need to do any kind of spacer or anything like that. There was plenty of contact with the 74's frame with just a little bit of the perch sticking above it, so I took another piece of metal, just, you know, some spare metal that I had off of the frame, and then I just made a reinforcing plate on top. So it is extraordinarily strong. I still got to do a little bit of cleanup to do, but I'm ready to get this thing down on the frame, so let's do it. And there you have it. The front end is back on this truck for the first time in a long time. I'll tell you guys what, while I'm extremely exhausted and this has been a lot of work, this has also been one of the most fun processes I've ever done on a build, just because it's like playing with a big model set, trying to figure out how all of these mismatched components can go together to create something unique at the end of the day is incredibly rewarding. If you haven't subscribed already, definitely do so, because there's a whole lot more content where that that came from. In the next video, I'm gonna be turning my attention to the back of the truck. I'm gonna start putting the bed together and get all of that lined up, as well as finishing up making custom core support mounts in the front. So hopefully by the end of that video, we can get the entire body loosely put together so we can get all of that dialed in before I pull everything back off and turn my attention back to the frame and getting the LS swap in order and so on and so forth. Lots and lots of work to do. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the videos a lot. And of course, a big thanks to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this build. Check them out and check out the links down in the description box below. Be sure to support the brands that support the channel. It really means a lot. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.